Thank you very much. My goodness, it's good to see you all. I mean, I can't believe we've got so many people here tonight, but we've had our share of challenges over the last couple of years, haven't we? We've had bushfires, we've had COVID, we've had lockdowns, we've had floods most recently, and it's so good. It's so good to be all together again, to be able to share these moments. Anduril Australia has been in existence now for 6 months. It's been a very, very busy time for the team. In that time, we have signed a contract with the Defence Science and Technology Group and the Royal Australian Navy to develop 3 prototypes for an extra-large undersea vehicle, and we're going to deliver that in 3 years. We've been building a team from me, up to 40 people, and we'll be working through that process over the next few months. And on top of that, we have 4 new contracts that we are targeting across all of the domains. So we have an undersea vehicle, as you know, we have a land contract that we're targeting, we have an aviation, aerospace program that we're targeting, and of course the final frontier, space. So Anduril Australia is just beginning its journey. It's a journey that is really important because, as we all know, things are never more unstable in the world than they are today. I know that the Ukrainian war that started 10 days after I joined, I hope I had nothing to do with that, has kind of been beamed into our lounge rooms. And it's so disturbing to see what can happen when a dictator decides to impose himself on a freedom-loving nation. We'll talk a little bit more about the Ukraine. It'd be unwise to kind of ignore the Taiwanese situation in our own backyard and the level of instability that brings into our life. And the bottom line for me is that I've realised that freedom just ain't free. We've got to work hard to maintain our freedom. And at Anduril, what we're doing is to work really hard on putting the latest technology into the hands of our brave women and men who assure our freedoms so that they can win the next conflict, should it happen, and not have to carry equipment on their backs and use equipment that was successful in the last conflict. That's our mission. We certainly hope that the equipment and the technology that we build is a deterrence to that happening. That's in everyone's interest, certainly in our vision. We hope that the technology that we derive and deliver makes our adversaries think twice before they come. So tonight's going to be fantastic. You are in the ops room, and the ops room is where it all happens. Really, really lucky to have Palmer Luckey with us this week. We've had a fantastic week. Palmer has been very, very generous with his time. Flew in Monday morning on the red eye, straight down to Canberra, had some terrific meetings with DSTG and the Department of Defence. We've been up in Sydney having a whole bunch of other meetings, and we're here tonight. We're also going to be joined on stage a little bit later around the fire by Dr. Shane Arnott. Shane is our chief engineer, as Mark mentioned. Shane comes in 24 years at the Boeing, from the Boeing company. He ascended to the highest levels of engineering authority in the Boeing company. And I think most importantly, he's responsible for the first airplane that Australia has built in the last 50 years, the Loyal Wingman. We're super excited to have Palmer and Shane on the stage. I hope you're really going to enjoy it. I have no idea where it's going to go, but that's the fun thing. Please enjoy yourself. We've got food coming around, beverages are available, and I can see you at the back, all the way back there. So if you want to come forward, there's a few seats, but thank you all for coming. Thank you to those on the live stream too. I think we're up over 1,000 people in the live stream now. Everybody is welcome, and I hope you enjoy tonight. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, David. Now, as you all know, there is no single person who looms larger over the history and arguably the future of virtual reality than Palmer Luckey. Now, at the age of 19, Palmer founded Oculus, got a Kickstarter going, raised $1 million or $2 million in the first 24 hours.
$1 million in the first 24 hours.
All right, $1 million in the first 24 hours. The rest, as they say, is history. And while we will talk a little bit about Oculus tonight, it's not our focus because it turns out that Oculus was only the entree, right? We are now settling into the mains. And I don't think anyone quite expected this was going to be the main. And by that, I mean pretty much everything by this, because the future has suddenly become different. And to walk us through that future as he sees it, please welcome to the stage Palmer Luckey. And once again, to the folks on the live stream, please pop your questions in the chat. Folks in the room, think up your questions. We will have time for them.
Can we have a few people on the side come and take these chairs?
Yes.
It's just me sitting in them. So
we've got some beautiful comfy chairs.
Get into the comfy chairs. I think you can fit 3 people if you're cozy per chair.
And there's a couple more seats over here along the wall. Excellent. Thank you. So we can now talk about the fact that you have just been to Ukraine. So what's that about? What were you doing?
So, I mean, it's worth going back in time because I came back from Ukraine recently, but I actually met President Zelensky a few years ago, shortly after he was elected into office. And he contacted Anduril shortly after he was elected because he saw an article in Wired magazine that had been written about the work we were doing with U.S. Border Patrol, protecting the U.S. southern and northern border. And the gist of the conversation was, hey, we have an even bigger border problem.
Yes.
Our eastern border is really important. We know that there's things actually coming across regularly on the intelligence and military side. And we need to know when forces are building up. We need to know if they're coming across. We need to know where they're coming across. And we want that to be tied into the targeting systems of our various weapons platforms. Ideally as a way that we can kind of threaten Russia and say, hey, if you cross the border, we'll know the second that it happens, we'll know where it's happening, and you'll be punished for it. Unfortunately, and I met him in New York to talk about this. The problem was actually on the bureaucratic side. And we'll come back to this later.
Right.
But the United States is very good at exporting weapons technology. We do a lot of weapons technology exports, including to Australia. What we are not good at is doing it on a fast timeline for new technology that's recently been developed. And the problems we ran into were not technological, they were bureaucratic. We just could not get them. Keeps cutting out. Are you guys able to hear me okay? All right. The problems were not technical, they were just purely bureaucratic. You sure I'm not cutting out? It's just, all right, I'm crazy.
Yeah. Move to the front.
All right, that'll probably work. The problems that we had were not technical, they were bureaucratic. And at the time, I'll admit that I didn't fight hard enough against that issue. And then as soon as the invasion began, and as soon as I realized that it was going in a way that could have been hugely impacted by our technology, I was devastated by that. So Anduril actually had people and hardware and software in Ukraine since, I would think, the second week of the conflict. We've continued, we actually donated a lot of equipment. We got in stuff through all kinds of means. My visit recently was to go and help with continued training that we're doing for Ukrainian armed forces, and then also to meet with a bunch of officials to discuss how we can get more of our technology in and cut through some of the red tape that's been in the way of helping them more.
So given that the Russian invasion happened, did that actually then change the bureaucratic environment? Is that why you were able to move things in so quickly?
It hugely changed the bureaucratic environment. All of a sudden, these agencies, it's multiple agencies, that had been kind of operating on a kind of peacetime assumption, all of a sudden realized that lives were at stake. And we've been able to, it's not just Anduril, it's a lot of companies. I mean, that's the reason Javelins have been able to get into Ukraine. It's the reason that we've seen Stinger missiles. It's the reason now they have HIMARS and they're actually able to outrange the Russian artillery that was just totally screwing them. And so things have gotten a lot better. But that's also only better relevant to this particular conflict. I mean, I'm kind of skipping ahead here, but one of the reasons that we are building in Australia is, I'm just going to freaking hold this. One of the...
Take that handheld down. There you go.
I much prefer handheld mics. One of the reasons that we're building in Australia is like with the XLAUV, the extra large autonomous undersea vehicle we're building. We're not just building it for Australia, we're also building that from the beginning for export to other nations. So Asian nations, European nations, because I love the United States, I'm a proud American citizen. We get most things right, but one thing we do not get right is quickly exporting things to countries before conflicts happen. Because if we're speeding up after the invasion's already happened, what is the point? The point of high-end defense technology is not to win a war that's already started. It's to deter that war from happening, to make the cost of engaging in that war so high that it never happens. Like this is not a secret I'm giving away. It's Australia's stated strategy. But Australia's goal vis-a-vis China is not to be able to beat China in a toe-to-toe war. It is to make the cost of China engaging with Australia in a conflict so high that it's unthinkable to China. And that's a much more reasonable goal.
Yeah,
and so that's why it's so important that we be able to get these weapon systems to countries before they need them, not after the invasion has already started.
So we're talking about a change from a retrospective point of view to a perspective. In other words, being able to anticipate the need and then be able to provide the need.
That's
then.
right.
All right, let's go back in the time machine. How did we end up here? All right, because again, you're the guy who breathed life back into VR. What was the path between you starting Oculus in 2012 and you starting Anduril in 2017?
So it actually goes back earlier than that. And I know we've talked about this before, but everyone thinks of my career as starting with Oculus. That's what everyone wants to talk about. And it's not a secret, but just nobody ever talks about it, is I actually worked before Oculus at a research lab, the University of Southern California's ICT Mixed Reality Lab, on an Army project called BraveMind, which was treating US veterans that were struggling with post-traumatic stress disorder using virtual reality exposure therapy. I was not an important part of the program. I was a lab technician. I only contributed in some very minor ways, but it did expose me to how defense technology can be important, and also a lot of the problems that the Department of Defense has procuring new technology. They have a lot of ancient technology. They do not have a process that allows them to get the latest technology quickly. And that stuck with me through all of my time at Oculus.
So I was at USC when the ICT was being set up, and that was one of the goals, was to basically route around.
Well, to be clear, ICT is not just a lab, it's an Army affiliate research center. So the ICT was built specifically in collaboration with the United States Army to bring new technology to bear on DoD problems. So you're right, that was the entire point.
Yeah. Okay. All right, so you're there, you're exposed to it, but you're also now seeing, I guess, the flaws in the system. As you're leaving Oculus, you're thinking, well, what's the next thing to do?
So a lot happened before then. I'm having to cover like 5 years of my career in a couple minutes. But the short version is I sold my company to Facebook. I made a few $1 billion. I moved up to Silicon Valley. I was living in a house with a dozen other people, and I started to realize that there was a huge problem that I had not fully understood. I had always assumed that the reason that technology companies in the United States didn't work with the military was because there was some kind of ideological opposition. You know, it's easy to believe, oh, those people in Silicon Valley, they don't support the military. What I found actually living in Silicon Valley is that 9 out of 10 engineers did support the military. They supported the idea that we should have a stronger military than our adversaries. And the real reason that these tech companies were not doing work with the United States military or foreign allied militaries is that they were afraid of upsetting China. They either had too much of a manufacturing interest in China, too much of an investment interest in China, too much of a sales interest in China. There's a whole bunch of different companies that have these ties, but the easiest example is actually Apple. Apple has 95% of their manufacturing in China. They've invested hundreds of billions in manufacturing in China. An investigative reporter just revealed a few months ago that Tim Cook had secretly agreed with the Chinese Communist Party to invest in a further $275 billion in Chinese manufacturing capability. And so Apple's in this bizarre situation where if they do anything that upsets China, then their entire company could be erased with the stroke of a pen. They can't rebuild that manufacturing anywhere else. It's not possible. And I say this as somebody who's manufactured millions of consumer electronics products. It is not possible for them to reset up anywhere. They even with their cash reserves, it's not even close to being feasible, because it's not just the money in the facilities. It's the people. It's the supply chain. It's the people. It's everything. And so I realized that we were in a really uniquely dangerous period in history, where for the first time in the history of my country, the most innovative technology workers were no longer working with the military. That's never been the case. Can you imagine if during the build-up to World War II, if General Electric and Westinghouse and Ford had said, oh, I don't think that we can work with the military. We really think Imperial Japan is a massive revenue opportunity for us.
Well, IBM had some interesting relationships with the Nazis, but we'll leave that aside.
I mean, we can actually dive into that. I'm happy to. IBM did build a lot of stuff for the Nazis, but to their credit, they also worked with the United States military.
Absolutely.
What's happening today is actually even worse in some ways. They're saying, we'll work with the other guys and we're not going to work with the United States. At least IBM had the decency to work with the US and the Nazis. And so the situation we're in is really, really terrible. Because back then, let's say that we did have this situation back then where those companies had decided they were not going to work with the United States military for those reasons. At least if a conflict had started, they would have been able to change their minds and pivot into helping the US because we had industrial capacity, because we had people who could actually build those things. Now we're in a much worse position. And this isn't just the United States. It's the United States, it's Europe, it's even Australia. We've shipped so much manufacturing capacity overseas that were the worst to happen, there's nothing we could do to change our minds. Apple cannot change their minds and start building things for the military. It's too late for that. And so this is true across so many companies in the Valley. And I know I've been rambling for a little while now, but that is really the reason that I started thinking about what a next generation defense company would look like. What would it look like to build a company that could take those bright people out of the advertising industry, out of the search engine optimization industry, out of the augmented reality mustache emoji industry, and put them to work on things that were more important. And I actually started looking for companies that I could invest in that could do this. Because I certainly didn't believe that the existing defense companies were going to build critical technologies like artificial intelligence, sensor fusion, high-end networking systems. They're very good at building some things, but there's some things where the best talent is in the tech companies.
So here's the thing. I think most Americans, most of the time, go around believing that American defense contractors have the best of everything. Now, there was a period of time until around the mid-1980s where half of the computing power on Earth was located in Fort Meade, was being used by the NSA, right? And so I think people are still carrying on with these beliefs around where technology is concentrated.
Well, I was one of those people. One of the reasons I wanted to work in an Army affiliate research center on virtual reality is because as someone who is excited about virtual reality, I said, I'm going to go straight to the best place I can possibly work on it, the military research labs. I'm sure they've got the best stuff. Okay. And it turns out that they do not. And that was shocking to me, and it stuck with me for a long time. But when I fast forward a few more years, I worked at Facebook for a few years, and I ended up getting fired. And the second that I was fired, I knew that I wanted to work on this problem that I had been thinking about for a while. I said, look, the big defense primes are not in a position to build the right things, partly because the government has created the wrong incentives for them to do so, which we might want to talk about later. And the big technology corporations are completely abdicating their duty to help solve the problem as well. And I wish that there were more startups that were solving the problem. But just to get very, very real, it's very, very hard to raise money as a defense startup. And this is true even when you've recently sold a company for billions of dollars, I found out. If you look, everyone knows what a unicorn is, right? A bunch of people in the room. It's a private company with a valuation of over $1 billion. Some variations slightly differ, but that's the one I'm going to stick with. In 35 years since the end of the Cold War, there's only been 2 unicorns in the defense space. So Palantir, SpaceX. And SpaceX sort of doesn't count because that's actually a Mars company, and it just happens that the military is their largest customer. It's not actually really a military-focused company. It's a military company out of convenience.
Well, Anduril is
Oh, yeah, we're the third one now.
Okay,
okay,
good. I just wanted to be clear on that, right?
Yeah. But it was before Anduril. Yeah. There were only 2 in 35 years, and both of them were founded by people who had just sold their previous companies for billions of dollars, which means investors just kind of write it off. And so if you were trying to start a defense company and trying to raise money from technology investors, they would say, look, I don't even understand why. I don't know anything about the military industry, but you're telling me in 35 years, there's only been 2 unicorns, both founded by billionaires? I don't even have to understand the dynamics. I just understand that clearly the United States is not good at turning small defense companies into big defense companies. To put this into perspective, 2 unicorns in 35 years, in that same period of time, you've got 2 mattress unicorns, 24 fast casual dining unicorns, 50 gaming unicorns, over 100 financial technology unicorns, about 50 automotive unicorns, something like 150 biotech unicorns. I mean, every other industry, even ones much smaller, have much larger scale success. So smart investors don't want to invest in defense. Smart founders don't want to found defense companies. And smart employees, they don't have a financial reason to do it. Most people I found in defense startups, they were doing it because they were passionate and they were patriotic. They certainly did not believe that that was the way that they were going to make the most money, which is a problem if you're trying to attract really smart people.
And when I was doing research for the interview that we did a couple of weeks ago, it's funny because it floated past one of my feeds that one of the defense primes has just started a big VC fund, right? And so clearly what you've done now has gotten them thinking differently so that there is venture capital around so that they can own a piece of that future?
Well, we were the third defense unicorn. I think there's like 7 new ones now.
Okay.
So like I often joke that other companies have raised a lot more money off our success than we have. And it's true because we've proven that this model works where you can spend your own money and build a defense product company where you decide what to build, how to build it, and then you sell it to a government customer when you have a working technology. We've proven that it can work. And that has led to, some big defense companies are making VC firms to try and jump into this. Also, a lot of the major VC firms are now making funds dedicated to defense. And that's something that's really powerful. It's almost, I'm giving myself a little bit too much credit. About half of it is because of Ukraine, and then the other half of it is because of our success.
Well, the thing is, when there's runs on the board, people will look at that and go, how do I get my own runs on the board?
Well, and there's also a lot of people who I think just hadn't thought about it. There were a lot of investors who they'd never sat down and thought about why they were not investing in defense technology companies. And I think that the Russia's invasion of Ukraine forced a lot of people to sit down and reconsider assumptions that they had. I've had so many conversations over the last few years, and I'm kind of bragging right now, but I'm on stage, so I get to tell my own stories. When I started Anduril 5.5 years ago, I got a lot of heat from my friends and my enemies alike, ranging from you're wasting your time, don't you understand that economic ties preclude any large-scale conflict, there's no reason for weapons, you're just wasting time, all the way to you just want to kill people, weapons are inherently bad, et cetera, et cetera. After the Ukraine conflict, many of the people, friends and even enemies, reached out to say, I was wrong. I actually understand now that it is possible for weapons to play a positive role in the world. And I think that that's changed a lot of people's thinking around investment. I recently said in an article that I think ESG funds should include defense investments. That's my controversial take of the day.
You're the only person I know who will regularly quote The Great Illusion in public, which is a book that's published in 1909, whose hypothesis...
A bestseller in 1909.
Not just a bestseller, but that groups were established who would read it. That the hypothesis of this book is that because global trade was increasing, the economic costs of war between great powers would overwhelm any desire for war, and that therefore...
The end of history. There's no more history to be had. Everything is stable. It's all going to be more or less how it is now.
And then, of course, 5 years later, the Great War happens. We have been living in what we would now call, what Tom Friedman got to name the Golden Arches hypothesis, right? That 2 nations that had McDonald's outlets would never go to war against one another. Because to have a Macca's, you have to have basically a stable, almost sort of OECD-grade economy for them to actually even go in with a franchise. And there had been no historical precedent in the post-Second World War era for 2 countries like that going to war until February, right? So once again, we've said, okay, well, there was an end to history, and now we're back to history.
I don't want to sound like a know-it-all, but this is why I started the company. Like, it was very obvious this was going to happen. This end of history thing, it keeps happening over and over. You read these books in 1909, and it could have been printed straight out of a globalist economist think tank report from 2020. It's like the identical words about how economic I'm stumbling on my words, on how countries being economically intertwined would preclude any conflict and make it just strategically unviable. And what it didn't account for is that sometimes some countries are willing to play a longer game than the immediate near-term economy, and that there are also countries that are willing to do irrational things. Many wars are irrational. In fact, most wars are fundamentally based in a miscalculation. People don't go to war when they think that they're going to lose or have a stalemate, typically. They typically go to war when one or both sides miscalculates the strength of their opponent relative to theirs. It's where they think that they can win and that the other guys will lose. And even if it turns out they're wrong, they often have to keep fighting because at that point, the die has been cast. You have to realize that that's how many wars are going to start. You can't assume that everyone is a rational actor. China is one example. I think the economic pain that would occur if they were to outright invade Taiwan would be immense. But they're not looking at this as a pure short-term economic calculus. They have a 100-year plan. They have a 500-year plan. They look at it as an abomination to their multi-thousand-year legacy. And they don't really necessarily need to act with near-term economics in play. And that's what so many people who live in the West did not grasp when I started Anduril.
All right. So to come back to that. So
and Putin, just like the whole thing.
You started Anduril. So you're starting a defense startup from nothing. So how does that happen? What is the basic thrust of what you want to do, and how does that then become products?
So when we started the company, it was very different than how I had started Oculus. Oculus, I had a product that I wanted to make, and that the company was kind of built around that. With Anduril, we built the company around an idea. What would a next generation Lockheed Martin look like? If you were to build the next major defense prime today, what would it build? It's probably not manned fighter jets. And actually, to frame it further, I thought of it from a science fiction perspective. If one were to write a hard science fiction novel where it is examining a defense contractor that dominates the industry 50 years from today, in that fictional narrative, what are the technologies that it would have had to start working on today to get there? I read a lot of science fiction, a lot of hard science fiction, and you start to realize that a lot of sci-fi ideas, it's not because they're just fun, it's because they make sense. There's a lot of sense to making autonomous systems, large numbers of mass-manufactured robotic systems across air, land, sea, and space, around applying artificial intelligence to fusing data from all of these different systems into a comprehensive view that can be shared between the people and the machines in real time, filtering out everything that doesn't matter. That was actually how we came to the conclusion of what we're going to build. We started the company not knowing exactly what the products would be, and then we sat down and said, okay, what do we need to start building? And
so you have a set of, I guess, core directions, core technologies that then become core products?
Right, and our first core product we built was Lattice, which is our AI sensor fusion platform that connects together all of our different hardware products, and actually also a lot of third-party hardware products. In fact, we've integrated with more third-party products than our own stuff. And then we built hardware products on top of this. So, autonomous surveillance towers for counter-intrusion on the land, counter-UAS towers that are able to detect, jam, and kinetically destroy enemy aircraft of a varying range of sizes, building undersea vehicles, building space sensing platforms, building a whole bunch of aerial vehicles that are able to feed data into Lattice. And every product that we've built is built on top of that same software platform that did. So that's kind of how it started. It was very much, what are the things we need to build today if we're going to be the Lockheed Martin of the 2050s?
So, and it's only occurring to me as a question now, because you're making things that have to work, and they have to have, I guess, a high degree of reliability associated with them, you have to test them a lot, which means the wheels are going to fall off the wagon a lot of the time. So, I mean, do you have any stories from that process of doing things and having them go horribly wrong on the way for them going horribly right?
I don't want to tell you any of those stories. I mean, there was a wise man who once fired me who said, "Move fast and break things." I think in the defense space, you can't really afford to think that way because there's so much that is on the line.
Yeah.
In the test process, sure, move quickly. But when you're actually talking about what you're going to deploy, you can't afford to push a new update and A/B what works better when people's lives are on the line. And it just doesn't work. And so it does require a little bit of a mindset shift. But in terms of testing, I mean, we have multiple test sites. We have our Capistrano test site, which is close to Camp Pendleton. We have a test site out in the Mojave Desert. We have also the Nevada National Security Site just became our primary test site. That's where the U.S. Department of Energy blew up something like 950 nuclear weapons, and now they've turned it into a weapons range where you can do basically anything. It's one of the only places in the United States where the FAA has no authority whatsoever. It's incredible. But by the way, this would never happen today. It's only because we cut out a square of FAA authority in the 50s, and they haven't been able to claw it back yet. I hope that DOE keeps it. Anyway, we have a lot of these test sites, and we put a lot of time into testing because we have to test it to a very high degree of confidence before we start telling people to have their lives depend on it. And that's a big difference between what we do and what a lot of tech companies do.
So the way defense has classically worked is that the military will specify something and then defense contractors will bid on it and then they'll go away for some period of time, which can be as long as a piece of string, and then they'll come back and maybe it'll work or maybe it won't. Is Anduril doing it that way, or is Anduril doing it differently?
So we do it differently in a few ways. First of all, most defense companies are working on a cost-plus basis where they're paid to develop technology by the government using taxpayer money. And the problem with that is the process of getting that money is very, very, very slow. The government trickles it out over a very long period of time. There's a lot of gates that you have to get through to get that money. And then on top of that, cost-plus contracting incentivizes you to have as complex of a system as possible, to spend as long as you can while still getting paid and not getting your contract canceled. And it's that incentive that the government has created that leads to so many of these projects just being done in bizarre ways that go on forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And people make a lot of money working on projects forever. They get paid to do work, not to make things that work. And Anduril
is the F-35 an example of this? I mean, I know we don't want to trash it necessarily, but aren't they all? They're all recalled right now, aren't they?
I am now so tightly integrated into the defense apparatus that there are some things I can't speak honestly on. Because I'll upset people one way or the other. Okay. If I say that it's great, people will be upset with me. If I say it's terrible, people will be upset with me. And so it's actually just safer for me to say something ridiculous like this and let everybody guess what my true thoughts on the Joint Strike Fighter program that's been going on for decades. It cost over $1 trillion. By the way, one of the 3 tenets of the program was affordable. It's actually still on the patch.
All right, so
I'll say one more thing, which is this is an important thing for people who haven't worked with the military to understand. Generally, the military is not the one that's actually coming up with these requirements. And this is going to sound like a conspiracy theory. It's not. The requirements that come out in these requests for proposals that they put out, they've almost always been deeply shaped by contractors in the private sector. No request for proposals is coming out that was not born of deep collaboration with the industry. The problem with this is that the industry is incentivized to only talk about things that are possible for their business model, which involves putting all the risk on the taxpayer. Like one of my favorite examples is there's a branch of the U.S. military that has a technological development roadmap where they talk about when they're going to start deploying certain technologies. In it, they say that they are going to start initial field trials of partially autonomous, remotely piloted ground vehicles in 2035. Which
before we're getting our submarines, so you know.
and then of course the actual timeline for fielding autonomous ground vehicles is out into the 2040s and 2050s. Yeah. Why? Because they went to the contractors and asked them what's possible. If you go to the private sector, they would never say these things.
Let me break that down. Why is it? I mean, just because this is a personal issue for Australians now, why is it that we got told we're not getting a submarine until the 2040s? Is that simply because the entire system is constructed this way?
The entire system is constructed this way, and I think very few people in the defense apparatus wake up and say, another day, another chance to screw the taxpayer. But it's a natural response to the incentives. The people who like to run overly long test schedules will naturally rise to the top. The people who are able to run the most successful, financially successful programs are the ones who will then get promoted. And so you end up with a system where from top to bottom, you have people who are built to think a certain way and build a certain way. And inside of that way, it is true. It will take until 2040s to build all of these things. And so one of the big differences with Anduril is internally we often say, always trust that the customer understands their problems, because they often do, where they're going to fall apart, where they fall short, where they're concerned about. Never trust their solutions, because their solutions are usually informed by what the major primes have told them is the right solution, usually very complex, very long development timelines, tons of money required. So we always try to work from first principles. We listen to them on the problem, and then we figure out, okay, with our technical knowledge and our understanding of what's possible, what is the fastest, most elegant way to actually solve this problem? And we've been very successful with that model.
So do you have, given that is so different from what the defense folks would be familiar with, do you have trouble convincing them that you can do that? I mean, if you have this...
It's complex, because there are people inside these organizations who do understand this model, and they actually like it, because you're going to them and saying, I'm going to use my own money, I'm going to be betting on this, and you're not going to have to spend any money until I prove that this stuff actually works. And even after that, we're going to continue to co-invest our money in developing this capability. And so that is what they want to hear. But the biggest problem we have is not people who think that our model is bad. It's actually very rare for us to run into people in defense or politics who think our model is bad. It's actually apathy. Apathy is our biggest.
That the model can't change.
Well, it's not even that it's actually worse. So what you're talking about is they believe the model can't change. I'm talking about people who they don't believe really one way or the other. They just keep doing what they've always done. They don't really care about changing it one way or the other. They don't have a strong opinion one way or the other. That's actually the biggest thing we've been up against, because that's how bureaucracies are. The number one job of every bureaucrat is to not get fired, and nobody ever got fired for doing the same thing that the same way everyone's always done it, or arguably nothing.
So I think this is actually the perfect point to invite Shane Arnott onto stage. So Shane is the chief engineer at Anduril. But Shane, you had an incredibly long, storied,
we'll see if it works.
And
Can you hear
successful.
me? Yep. Beautiful.
And successful career at Boeing, right? Can you tell us a little bit about that, which again is a classic example of a defense prime, but now you've come over to the other side. But could you tell us what you did at Boeing?
Yeah, so I guess the last project I worked, how about this? The voice projects. All right, Loyal Wingman was the last project I worked at Boeing, which was a real passion project. And I think it's useful to kind of tell the story, because as Australians, we tend not to tell our stories, but it was really born out of frustration and lament. So I was sitting around a similar libation facility like this one with some colleagues, and we were, talking about the state of the Australian defence industry, where the vast majority of what we did was buy stuff from other countries, flip spanners on it, and if we were lucky, strapped a radar to it or another weapon, and we thought that was exciting. And we seem to have forgotten, what it was like to actually build original equipment here in Australia. So we were buyers, and we forgot to be makers and builders. So this particular person I was talking to, and I'll name check some people if it's okay, Brad Yelland, who was the CEO or the CTO of BAE Systems. And we kind of thought, hey, together, airframer with a systems provider, we could credibly present this concept. And we've been getting briefed at the time on, the rising Chinese threat, which is now public, but, a number of years ago it wasn't, developing all these next generation air combat capabilities, EW, better weapons, all this type of stuff. And we put this concept together and we took it to defence. And to be honest, they kind of freaked out and they didn't know what to do with it. Not that the concept didn't work and we couldn't achieve it, but it was like, the answer was, well, Shane, we don't do this here. We buy it. You should take it back to the United States, and we'll let them get it and build it, and then we'll buy it back.
It's like the Australian car industry, right?
Right, exactly.
Build a car here, we'll buy it.
But look, we were lucky that we had a couple of good advocates. One advocate, a group captain at the time by the name of Robert Shipman, who's now Chief of Air Force for the RAF, and he kind of supported it through, new ideas are very fragile when they're born. And he helped us through the process. And when we finally got to a certain level of maturity, we had a very motivated defence minister at the time, Christopher Pyne, who was a big believer in Australian innovation. And he was the one who kind of pulled it through. Fast forward to today, things are pretty cool, right? So we've got multiple Loyal Wingmen, zipping around Woomera. We've got hypersonic weapons programs. We've got rockets out of a couple of companies in Queensland, so Gilmore, Black Sky, and now the XL program. So it's kind of nice to have played a small role in, getting Australia's mojo back in development. So, all right, it's cool stuff.
I mean, you've name-checked the XL AUV. What is it?
So the extra-large autonomous underwater vehicle is
Is there an L and an S and an M version of this, the different sizes?
There is, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so and for people, if they haven't checked it out, this is a good way to get a word in. Here we go. We'll do this at work. So we've got a VR version of the large displacement vehicle, which is the baby at only 6 metres long. So the extra large is a school bus sized vehicle that will be able to go very long ranges, be able to persist at a very long time, to be big enough to pack a whole heap of surprises to help our friends up north think twice about some of the things that they're doing and kind of flip the script on the denial tactics that they've been doing to us, denying our ability as the West to manoeuvre in the Pacific by, planting some surprises in the backyard and, helping rebalance things, if you will.
We do actually have a VR model of the large one, but we're not able to show it because it fills this whole space, and then we're not able to actually fit people in here. And the whole point is that you can walk around the model and have that work. So
plus the Navy won't allow us to do it, but yeah, we did it at an exercise, our Autonomous Warrior. For those who were there, it was pretty wild. So we had a tent the size of this, and you could literally walk around it, inside it, pull it apart. Yeah, it's very cool.
So from a business point of view, did you take a look at Australia going, they're having some trouble with the submarines, maybe we can help out? I mean, was that the chain of logic?
I mean, we started working on this even before that. So I think that a lot of the people have often asked, like, is the AUKUS deal related to why is the AUKUS? I give up. People often ask us if the AUKUS deal is related to us entering the country, and I say no. It's like we're outside of that deal, but the same factors that gave rise to that deal, closer cooperation between the United States, between the Brits, between Australia, those are really the factors that drove us to look here. I don't want to sound unfriendly, but I'll just be honest with you guys. I think 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, there was a pretty commonly held belief in the United States that there was a possibility that Australia might fall into the Chinese sphere of influence, not because they wanted to, but because of geopolitical realities, of the location, of the strength of the military, of the strong desire that China has for a lot of the natural resources that Australia has. And I think that the AUKUS deal has really put even the final remnants of that to rest. The way that China's been acting is not a way that Australia is going to align with. Australia is going to stand with Western allies. And I think that change in circumstance also made it a no-brainer to come to Australia and be a part of making sure that remains the case forevermore.
So does the XLAUV fill the gap for us into the somewhat indefinite future until we actually get new manned submarines?
So, Mark, are you trying to get me in trouble with my customer?
No.
The short answer is
I'm asking as
no.
a concerned Australian.
Yeah. So, look, I think the nuanced answer is that the crewed submarines are required for a vast number of missions that an uncrewed system cannot do. But that said, there's a very big waterfront, literally, that the Australian Defence Force needs to cover, and having some uncrewed capabilities to complement the crewed capabilities is very useful, particularly when the mission is dull, dirty or dangerous, which uncrewed systems are perfect for. So that's kind of the idea, to be able to expand Australia's sphere of influence. The United States is asking Australia to step up more, China being in our backyard. We need to do this. So it was kind of a perfect capability to bring here. And also we had some great support. So Rear Admiral Quinn, who's head of Navy capability, also DST, as David talked about, is riding shotgun with us, which is quite unusual to have kind of both sides working together on this program. So particularly under Tanya Munro, who runs DST now, she's really shifted things to be supporting industry as much as defence. Right. So it's this incredible kind of confluence, if you will. Plus, Australia is kind of a mini DOD. So it's a great sandbox, if you will, to create capability. The XL is just one example. And plus, we're a big country with a low population density, whole heap of wide open space. So it gives us an opportunity to try things out and get to good a lot quicker by using our test ranges and all that type of thing.
So if we're going to have those at some point, does that mean that there is a future or a potential future where that massive sea border is being patrolled continuously or semi-continuously by XL AUVs?
Yeah, that's the intent.
That's the whole point.
So if that happens, are those going to be designed and made and tested here, or is that going to happen at Anduril in America, and then are the products going to be coming over? In other words, are we going to be falling back into that trap of basically relying on Americans to provide all the defence needs?
So this particular program is going to be an Australian designed and built system. So we've got a baseline system, the large displacement vehicle, it's got certain systems that can then translate to the larger. But the intent is to set up a production line here once we get through the 3 vehicles in 3 years, which is the current program. And knock on wood, if this thing works, we're looking to put it to work not too long after that 3 years. But by the same token, we've got interest from other customers, including the United States. And the expectation there is if it does go with them, that there'll be some level of production that happens for the United States customer there, because there's interest, but certainly for the rest of the world for that to happen out of here in Australia.
All right, so is that all that's on dock? I mean, I think, David, you said there are 4 different programs. Can you talk a little bit about what else you're working on here?
No. So we do have other programs with other arms of the Defence Force. I don't think we can talk about them publicly, but certainly with all the ingredients that I talked about translate to all domains. And as David kind of outlined, we've got pursuits and there's strong signal coming back from Defence that they like what they're hearing and the approach that we take to get things done a lot quicker. I think that's what people are sick of, the long process, and other companies that kind of do things a certain way with the cost plus approach, they're incentivized to take things a lot slower. They like what they're hearing from Anduril, so we're excited.
So you spent, again, most of your career working in a defense prime. You've spent, is it 5 years now at Anduril?
That's 12 months.
Oh, sorry, 12 months here.
So I joined on the 4th of July last year in the middle of a worldwide pandemic, moved my family to the United States. It was a very popular thing to do. But, it's worked out pretty well.
So what's it like being someone who has spent their career in one kind of environment with one set of incentives, moving to another environment with another set of incentives? Yeah,
look, I get asked that question a lot. I think the big thing is the expectation of innovation and the speed aspect to it. So Wingman, as an example, took a long time and a lot of PowerPoint charts and many meetings to get people to say go. And in an environment that's, built to kind of be checks and balances, get everything right, getting people to listen to and accept ideas is very difficult. Whereas in Anduril, the ability to pitch ideas and have them heard and then consumed and then actioned is just incredible. So I think when we, conceived this idea with Chris Brose, who was partner in crime, the CISO of Anduril, plus the guys from Dive Technologies, Bill Lebo, Tim Raymond, and it was literally 0 PowerPoint charts. I think 3 meetings and a big whiteboard session with the leadership, and it was fairly intense questioning. It wasn't like an easy pass, like we've got this huge bank account, we're just going to be crazy. It was, how's this going to work? How's it translate? What's it look like beyond this? What's the future look like? And when we answered the questions, we went to Navy and we kind of pitched it, and it was a pretty quick turnaround that they went, yeah, let's do it. So just totally different mindset from that regard.
So Palmer, what do you do in terms of how you think about the organization to encourage that constant flow of ideas and suggestions that becomes new products?
Well, there's a whole bunch of things that you can do. Fundamentally, what we're trying to do is build an environment where you're rewarded for figuring out how to solve problems quickly. And it's worth noting that's different than a lot of primes. I have a lot of friends who have worked in big primes where they figured out how to get something done faster and ahead of schedule, and they were punished in their career for it because they were making either the leadership look bad or showing that the program had been overly technical and complex from the beginning. Or worse, they were just making the company less money by getting things done too quickly. And we want to create a company that is the exact opposite. If someone figures out how to do something in half the time or half the cost, I don't care if it's losing money. I need to promote that guy. I need to make sure that he has more responsibility, not less. And there's a million ways we get into. I'm not going to give a lecture on how to manage a successful business today, but fundamentally, you have to align all of your incentives from the career cycles to the pay incentives to the equity grant incentives around rewarding people who are able to prove that they can move quickly and efficiently.
So career cycles. I want to bring this up because you mentioned this when we recorded the podcast. Was the number of projects that an engineer works on at a Northrop versus the number of projects they would work on in their career.
Yeah.
So could you talk about that? Just because I think it's really interesting.
Well, a few things. Where's Spencer? Where's Spencer? Spencer, when were you an intern? When were you an intern? Okay, so so Spencer Fishman is here. He was an intern in fall of 2019, and then less than 2 years later, he was the lead of the Ghost program, the engineering lead for the Ghost program, which is our helicopter drone. And now he's moving over here to be one of the leads on the submarine work that we're doing. And so, like that is the type of that career path that I'm talking about, where you can move very quickly. If you show that you can kick butt, you are not going to be held back simply because of seniority or because you don't have the right piece of paper. As a college dropout, that would also be hypocritical of me.
All right,
What was that? Hell yeah.
Hell yeah. Let's just shift a little bit here. Now, folks, we're getting close to question time, so get them, start thinking, particularly if you're on live stream, pop them into the chat window. What can we expect of the future of defense, and I think probably the future of our geopolitical situation?
I'm going to hand this one to Palmer, I think.
I mean, I talked about the science fiction future earlier. I think it's a lot of the same ideas. There's a lot of smart people who have thought about what the future looks like, and quantity has a quality all of its own. You're going to see much larger numbers of systems. You're going to need the technology that allows you to leverage those large numbers of systems. You can't have, let's say millions of robots that are all acting together if they all have to be individually piloted directly by a person. It's just not going to work. So autonomy is going to be critical to that as well. I feel like, and I don't want to give away our whole roadmap, but it's going to be lots of autonomous things across air, land, sea, subsea, and space, all working together so that every sensor is a targeting node for every weapon. And that's kind of the big picture future, where you can have small numbers of people making very intelligent decisions and then having their intent perfectly translated without going through many layers of human telephone to the desired effect. So high quality reproduction of intent through autonomy is going to be a big deal. Geopolitically, I think most people know what the two big threats are right now to stability. It's mostly Russia and China, but we're already thinking ahead to what the next threats are going to be. There's a lot of cool things about these types of technologies. There's also massive potential for asymmetric disruption, where you could have a small nation make massive advances that make them an outsized power, maybe not against the US. You're not going to see them necessarily. You're not going to see it necessarily them threatening the U.S. directly, but one of the things I expect to see is, for example, some small African nation to say, you know what, we're going to heavily invest in autonomy and autonomous technology, and we're all of a sudden going to be way, way stronger than all of our nearby rivals, and that's inevitably going to lead to conflicts. I think you're also going to see a lot of proxy wars. I think the odds of a direct hot war between the US and China are very, very low. I think the odds of a proxy conflict over minerals in South America or South Africa or Southeast Asia, quite high. And so that's probably going to be another thing that we see happen. And then there's the really spooky stuff that scares me the most, which is like, garage terrorists building bioweapons in their garage that they think are targeted, but life finds a way. And unfortunately, I don't have a solution to those problems. I'm just telling you about the things that scare me.
Yeah, but sensors are the way you at least know you have a problem. All right. My career, I started working as an engineer 40 years ago this month. So at the time I started working as an engineer, the best jobs in technology were in fact defense jobs. And then we saw, with the end of the Cold War, a swing, and then entertainment became the driving force in the economy, so consumer electronics. And in fact, if you take a look at it, the best chips in this room and in the world are the ones that are running in your smartphone, right? Best chips, highest end. Are we now starting to see a pendulum swing back away from the technologies of entertainment and back into the technologies of defense?
I think it's a really small pendulum. Like most of the pendulums over here, but part of it's swinging back. I mean, look, video games are really fun to work on. I know. I worked in the games industry. It was great. It was super fun. It's the same thing working in the consumer technology space. It's a lot of fun. You get to move fast. You get to do cool things. You get to make things that all of your friends are using. So I don't think we're going to see people swinging away from that because it's just so attractive. But we don't need everybody. What we need is enough people to leave that area, and for enough of them to decide that what they're doing on that side of the pendulum is not going to matter, that nobody's going to remember it, that it's not going to matter when they're dead, and that they can work on something more important in the meanwhile. And that's how Anduril gets a lot of people from the tech industry is, like part of it is come work at Anduril, we pay you well, we give you responsibility, we're gonna promote you to be head of a major program from being an intern in a couple years because you're super great. Like that's part of it. And then the other side is to honestly plant a poison pill in people's brains. Like I'll meet with recruits that are at social media companies. I'll be like, your job, it's worthless. You're gonna make a bunch of rich guys 0.1% more money if you work really hard for the next 30 years. And that's it. That's all you'll ever do. And nobody will remember it. And when the world all comes collapsing down, you'll remember me telling you this. And I've told people things like this. And then they come back a week later like, yeah, I actually can't stop thinking about it, and I can't. I don't care about my work anymore, so I'm going to come work for you. Yeah.
Welcome to the red pill with Palmer Luckey. All right.
I just take the fears that I had when I was in the games industry, and then I just explain to them what that feels like in their future, and it works.
It is time for your questions, folks. First question's going to be in the room. We need you to put up your hand. Please don't ask your question until you have the microphone in your hand so that the people on the live stream can hear it. There's a bunch of hands up front, which is very brave of you because you are up in front.
Hi, Palmer. Thank you very much for the awesome talk tonight. I know you spoke a lot about in your talk about AI, especially how it integrates with sensor fusion. There's been a lot of talk recently about AI, especially after stuff that happened with Google and the natural language processing. A lot of your peers, like Elon Musk, sit very, very far pessimistic in the AI space, especially in general purpose AI. When you've got people like Mark Zuckerberg who are very optimistic about it. I'm very interested to know where you sit along that kind of spectrum in your kind of future view for general purpose AI.
Well, it's worth noting, Elon is not just cynical about it. He believes that research and development of AI weapons should be a war crime. So we're actually on quite different ends of the spectrum, even beyond cynical to positive. I say here's where I fall. I am worried about the potential of autonomy to do really spooky things, especially kind of like the Skynet scenario. It takes over all the weapons and then nukes us all. But it's actually near the bottom of a long list of things that I'm concerned about. I'm very concerned about very evil people using very basic AI. I'm much more worried about that than I am about extremely advanced AI wanting to wipe us out on its own. I'm more worried about the bioweapon stuff that I talked about. I'm more worried about people who are doing things irrationally in conflicts because they're the hardest to predict and the hardest to counter. And down near the bottom of that list is the Skynet scenario. Now, in the meanwhile, there's of course a lot of fears people have around autonomy and the way that it's used in conventional conflict. I think that the only way that you can impact that is to actually do it. So like with Anduril, we always have a human in the loop. There's always a person who's telling the AI what to do. It's not making any life or death decisions without a person who's directly responsible for that happening. And so there are some people who say, oh, how can you work on autonomy when it has so many ethical problems? Like, oh, you think the moral high ground is to wash your hands of it and let people who don't care about those things work on it? There's no moral high ground in ensuring that less competent, less principled people work on these problems, at least in my view. And on top of that, I'm rambling a little bit here, but I think autonomy is going to be similarly important compared to nuclear power. Imagine if the United States had tried to set international norms around the use of nuclear weapons or nuclear power if we had not had any nuclear weapons or nuclear power. Like, it would have been a joke. We never could have done it. The only way the US in particular can lead is if we actually are involved. That's the only way that we could potentially help regulate artificial intelligence in a way where it doesn't become a really big travesty internationally. So I'm spooked about it, but I think we'll manage it.
All right. Thanks. So I think we're going to go to a question from the live stream. So Shannon, please.
Yeah, can you hear me? Okay, hi. AI is great, but how do you plan to reorganize the slow adoption and unwillingness of government to adapt fast enough to counter the threats of the future?
I mentioned this earlier, but most of the time what we face is not even people that don't want to, it's just the apathy, but we find the right groups inside a government. I mean, Shane talked about how it took specific people inside the Australian government to pull things through the knothole on Loyal Wingman. And it was specific people who wanted to make things happen that got that done. And we have this happen all the time in the United States. Like, we do not have the entire defense apparatus convinced that it needs to move quickly, but you don't need to convince everybody. You only have to convince a few of the right people.
Yeah, and I think that's the opportunity in Australia. Like, if we can get the coalition of the willing and the competent kind of together, because we're a smaller nation, and it is happening. So the Royal Australian Navy, this program is part of an initiative to do exactly that, to bring on what they're calling combat-ready prototypes. And this program kind of is the instantiation of that, of how to accept incremental capabilities of more AI, different payloads, etc. So we're going to have the opportunity as part of this program, and the people who come and join us, maybe some of the people in this audience, as part of that, to redefine kind of what that future looks like. So I think there is parts of the customer that get it. Of course, there's a huge amount that, things are changing, their lives are on the line. Of course, they want the best capabilities. So the leaders are pivoting, and we're seeing that happen. And Australia is definitely leading the way.
All right.
Also, say you have groups like DSTG, and that's the entire point of them is to try and make things like this happen. Nobody in DSTG is sitting there thinking, I'm just going to come to work today and see if anybody notices I didn't do anything.
Question from the room. The question's back there. Does someone have the microphone?
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? There we go.
We got you.
Colin Clark, Breaking Defense. I'm curious how much you guys are looking to all domain operations as a sort of model. I mean, you're talking swarms, you're talking AI, you're talking autonomy, all of which have been touted as key to all domain operations, which the Pentagon says is key to war fighting for the next 25 or 30 years. Australia going to follow something along the same lines, you think?
Yes. I mean, the all-domain operations are going to be key, and there's a lot of buzzwords. There's all-domain operations, joint all-domain operations between nations. We did a lot of work on ABMS, the Advanced Battle Management System for the U.S. Air Force. And people have different buzzwords for it, but the idea of connecting all these systems together so that they're all sharing data with each other and acting on targets together is a big deal. But I would add to all domain is going to be the joint all domain idea. The idea that we have multiple Western allies that are able to seamlessly have their systems working in conjunction with our systems. Because right now, there's a lot of human translation that needs to happen for that to work. If we can all be working with the same tools, it's going to be better for all of us.
All right. Shannon?
Okay, one question from the live stream. Is Anduril also positioning to support other small defense startups pull through the hard stage to become makers and builders and unicorns in Australia too? So are we helping other defense startups?
Yep, so we've been talking to, I think you guys call them SMEs, small and medium enterprise. It's tricky for me in the US, that means subject matter expert in the contracting side. So, but you've got your SMEs and you got your SMEs. We've been talking to, I think, Dave, is this right, over 40 companies recently that we've been having deep discussions with, working on. Some of them manufacturers, some of them technology companies that are that have already made technology. We actually already have some vendors that are here in Australia. APD is super good. You guys make the best. So you're like one of my favorite motor controller companies, probably the #1 motor controller company. It's like we actually already have a lot of Australian suppliers, even for the products that we're making in the US. So it's been really easy to kick that off here. The reason I'm stoked about that is because I know we've grown quite a bit. We're 1,300 people, but I still really deeply care about small companies. I'm always telling the US government that we need to get better, not at helping the Palmer Luckey of today. We need to get better at helping the Palmer Luckey of 2012, when I was 19, living in a camper trailer, starting Oculus with not a dime, but pretty good technology. And so we're talking to a lot of companies that are slightly past that phase, but they don't necessarily have a sales team or a legal team or all the overhead required to manage working with the government directly. And we really want to be a partner to help them work on programs that they would never be able to necessarily do on their own without a partner like us. I'm all about working with everybody. I definitely can't do this alone.
Yeah, no, we're all about working with the small businesses because it's a DNA compatibility thing. So there's a few companies we've been talking to and they go, oh, where's your RFI and RFP? And it's like, okay, wrong company. So, we're looking for people who can run with us and have the same mindset that we have as a, Valley-style company and a startup, at least in spirit. Not so much with $2 billion in the bank and 1,300 staff, but that's a big thing. And Australia's full of some really smart small companies that hopefully, if we work together, we can make them mediums, And that's a big problem in Australia at the moment. We've got a whole heap of bigs, a whole heap of smalls, but we really need to bring some people up, particularly if we're going to be manufacturing and getting a solid supply chain into the future. So that's our plan.
All right, back out to the room. Who do we got?
Yeah, we got Glenn Alcock here. It's really good to have you here, Palmer. It's awesome to listen to you talk. So my question is probably a little bit more business orientated. I run a small business here in Australia, and I often get criticised for having a very similar mentality to yourself in the sort of field of dreams, build it and they will come style approach. But what would be your advice in the way that we should sort of bridge that gap to be able to still invest as a small company, but lean forward with our defence force here?
Well, do you know anything about batteries, Glenn? We've been talking to Glenn about some batteries for an extra large submarine. Bringing the ideas forward, like we are in a different position, and we're mindful of that as well. So the conversation that we're having, I think, is a good one and a constructive one. And we're a company that's fueled by ideas. We're kind of looking for energy as well. So everything we're doing, let's keep that conversation up. And then for everyone else that we haven't had that conversation with, reach out. We want to have that engagement. We want to move at pace. We want people that are contributing something special, because that's what we're trying to do. Put your hand up and we'll see what we can make happen.
And then even if you're not going to work with us, my advice for Field of Dreams pitches to people that are in defense is to really tightly correlate what you're making with all of the buzzwords that they've put in their list of strategic priorities that they're going to put in their requirements. Like, it sounds kind of lame, but it makes a huge difference in getting through the bureaucracy. When it's like, no, see this ridiculous thing we're doing? It's actually closely tied to your 5 circular priorities that feed into, and you can see inside of the circle 10 more priorities, and it sounds ridiculous, but it does help, and especially if you look at what they're putting out in their requirements, where they're saying these are our biggest problems. If you can tie exactly to how you're solving those problems, that will help you get through people who are lower imagination, that can't necessarily make that leap themselves. You have to be like, this is how this ties to the thing that you are judged on in your role. And that's made a big difference. It was not something that I did a very good job of actually early in the Anduril days. I am now excellent. I've got lightning bolts connecting everything. It's very powerful. Got to have the lightning bolts.
Okay. One question from David on the live stream. What will be the hardest part of integrating new tech, such as the XL AUV, into the existing defense equipment and infrastructure, so interoperability and things like that?
I mean, the biggest challenge is that a lot of it was built so long ago. One issue that we've had integrating, for example, legacy radar systems into Lattice is that it was not designed to be networked with anything. It was not designed to be feed raw data to anything.
How old are these systems that they're not designed to be networked to anything?
Many of them only output to literally a base station that you stand at. The data stays on the screen. Okay. We've had discussions about like building cameras, running computer vision to read the screen and then stream it off somewhere.
Okay.
That is one of the problems. Actually, I'll go off on a tangent for a second. One of my dream ideas, and if somebody wants to steal this, that's fine. One of my dream ideas is API bot. It's a humanoid robot with the dexterity of a frail old man, so it doesn't need to be very good, but it's enough to operate old defense equipment. So basically you could, and all it does is it's just a layer where it has an API you can plug into, and you tell it to do things, and you use machine learning to teach it how to operate the machine. So you're like, all right, you just send it a command, turn the surface-to-air missile launcher on. And you wait like a minute while it walks around, and it pulls out the lever, and it turns the little squeegee on the oil filter, and then it pushes the start button. It's not a terrible idea to have a universal API bot that could work with all this legacy equipment, but these are the problems we run in with integrating. That's really the level of automation you're dealing with for a lot of legacy equipment.
Out to the room again? Yes.
G'day, Shane. It's Tony. How are you, mate?
Good, mate. Good to see you.
Good to see you. Hey, we got a bit of shared history, and tonight I'm hearing a little bit about technology, but more about human nature and more about anthropology and more about history. And it looks like you're having fun, so congratulations. I'd appreciate your comment and also maybe Palmer's on the balance between what it means to be a good engineer or a good technologist, but also what it means to be in a good organisation and have the right culture. Because I'm hearing a lot about less about technology and less about ones and zeros and more about the right organisation.
Yeah, I think a lot of the mantra, and Palmer talked about it earlier, is about hiring good people, creating an environment, and then getting out of their way, and just seeing what happens next. And this is not a crazy idea. Like, you go back to any of the conflicts over time, and you look at the technology that was created when there was motivation. The motivation perpetuated itself in lack of process and oversight to get stuff done. Humans did amazing things in those periods. So, Anduril's about creating that environment for, smart folks. And, we select very carefully who we bring in. But the whole idea is, that empowerment and not having 50,000 gate reviews every time you want to, change something. And so much of it is, I think, about that. It's just the sociology and creating the environment to allow people to create. That's kind of what it's about.
All right, Palmer, I want to give you the last word, but the thing I want to hear, because you haven't really done it yet, I need to hear you make a full-throated pitch for the engineering talent that I know that you want, who's probably in this room tonight.
So one of the reasons I haven't had to make a full-throated, all-out pitch is because most of the people, if you're already in this room, you're already a lot further along than most of the people that I try to reach. The pitch is, Anduril is not a defense contractor. We're a defense product company. We use our own money to decide what to build, and then we build things that work, and then we sell them to the government. It's the way that every other industry works. It's the way that defense should work. If you come and work for us, you're going to have a great time. My goal is not only to make it a professionally fulfilling job and a spiritually fulfilling job, but also a fiscally fulfilling job. I know that everyone has a fiduciary duty to their families, and I really understand that and take that seriously. I don't want to sound like a gross money-obsessed guy, but I'll do it. One of the things that I'm most proud of in my career is the fact that when Oculus was acquired, and people can berate the acquisition all they want, they can make fun of Facebook, I'm fine with that. But there's one thing that I did that I'm very proud of. Every single person in the company became a multimillionaire and financially independent, from the receptionist at the front desk all the way up to the CEO. And that was something I'm still extremely proud of. It's something that I hope that we can pull off again with Anduril. And I think we're going to make a much bigger difference while we're doing that than almost any other company. I want to save taxpayers hundreds of billions of dollars a year while we make tens of billions of dollars a year. Both of those things are possible, and if people come and join us, I won't take it for granted. I know that everyone we hire has plenty of options. They could work at a big tech megacorp, they could do their own thing, they could go back to school to get a master's and then a PhD and then a second one. But I think that they'll have a much better time if instead they come to Anduril, and we will treat you well, and I don't think you'll regret it.
And the key thing is that we're going to build here in Australia. So quite often there's all these great companies, but you've got to go to the United States, you've got to go to Toulouse or whatever to actually build stuff. So the notion here, it took me 20 years in another former employer to build an airplane. It was super cool. That's not what we're about here. We're looking to do the iterations. We're looking to get Australian versions of Spencer down the back with the right accent. To do these things and get a lot of reps. So come to Anduril, we're looking to build products. Australia is this great environment, this perfect sandbox to create capability. Companies like Anduril value speed, and we've got this environment that we can go quick. So I expect that we're going to be building a lot of products. So we need great people to build great products. Come work for Anduril.
Ladies and gentlemen, let's thank Shane Arnott and Palmer Luckey. Thank you. Thank you. And to close the evening, I'd like to invite David Goodrich back to the stage. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I don't think this works.
Tell everybody.
Hello? Yeah, good. Okay. Yeah, okay, guys. So listen, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been terrific to have you all. It's been terrific to have you online. The purpose of tonight is to instill you with the same passion and vision that all Andurilians have. I joined Anduril about 6 months ago. Was previously working as an advisor to the Commonwealth. I did not find another company in my decade of working with the Commonwealth who comes anywhere near as close to the potential to make a difference as Anduril. We are looking for the best people. We know that the room is populated by massively smart and talented human beings. If you would like to have a talk to us, Andurilians, put your hand up. This microphone is not working. I'm going to kill someone soon. Talk to someone who's from Anduril to find out what it's like to be on this journey with us. We are super passionate to have you. We are recruiting right now. We're recruiting to 40 people at the moment, but there's every opportunity and likelihood we're going to go to 4 times that in the next two years or so. So please reach out. We're super happy to have you. Bar's open. I can't help you at home. Food is on, but thank you so much for joining us. Good night.